John stood just beyond the frosted glass doors of the boardroom, his fingers tightening around the velvet ring box hidden in his palm. Tonight was supposed to be perfect, a proposal, a future, a promise. He had rehearsed the words so many times they hummed like muscle memory on his tongue. But as he reached for the door, a co-worker nudged him with wide eyes and an outstretched phone. "Hey, you might want to see this before you go in." John glanced down. His heart didn't break. It detonated. On the screen was a tweet posted less than 10 minutes ago. "From now on, I'll only lie beside the man who truly deserves me." The image below it was burned into his retinas. Sophia, his girlfriend of 3 years, pressing her lips against another man's under a twilight sky, the sea glinting behind them like a cheap movie set. And the man? Ryan, John's assistant. The replies were worse. One snarky comment read, "What happened to your pure love war god?" Her reply came instantly. "Compared to young Master Kane, John isn't even qualified to stand in front of me." The floor didn't collapse beneath John. That would have been mercy. Instead, the weight of it all settled in his chest like concrete, slow, suffocating, final. The irony was poetic. Because John wasn't just some man in a pressed shirt and budget wristwatch. He was young Master Kane, the heir to the Kane Conglomerate, the silent force behind the very boardroom Sophia's father had begged to be invited into. The one who had funneled secret capital into the Rivers Group, rescued her family's finances from a nosedive, and wore anonymity like armor to make sure the girl he loved chose him, not his net worth. And now she had discarded him like a used napkin for the assistant he'd personally hired, trained, and trusted. The engagement ring in his hand, a flawless pigeon egg-sized diamond, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. He remembered spending nights designing it himself, embedding her birthstone beneath the central gem. He thought it would mean something to her. It meant nothing. His grip tightened until the corners of the box cut into his palm. Across the hallway, through the boardroom's half-open door, he could see Sophia, smiling, laughing with her father, completely unaware of what she'd just destroyed. She didn't know he'd seen the post, she didn't know who he was, but she would. Not tonight. Tonight he would smile, shake hands, watch her glow in the flattery of businessmen who didn't know she'd just gutted the wrong man's soul. But soon, when the contract evaporates, when her father begs for answers, when Ryan stumbles under pressure he doesn't understand, she'll realize the truth. The man she mocked was the one holding her future in his palm. And now? He was closing his hand. When John first stepped into Rivera Enterprises, no one knew his last name. He had applied through a third-party agency, submitted a resume as John Carter, and took the entry-level position without negotiation or ego. He wore off-the-rack shirts, used an old-model phone, and carried himself with the quiet diligence of a man who had everything to prove and nothing to boast about. In truth, he had nothing to prove to them. He was already young Master Kane, the heir to one of the most powerful financial groups in the country. But after years of boardroom warfare and soulless social functions, John had wanted to do something real, not just for himself, but for Sophia. Her father's company had been on the verge of collapse when they first crossed paths. A chance encounter at a charity auction, Sophia in a pale blue dress, her smile soft but shy, had carved itself into his memory like the first note of a symphony. They spoke for less than 15 minutes, but her voice stayed with him for hours after. 2 weeks later, he saw Rivera Enterprises on the list of potential acquisitions by the Kane Conglomerate. The analysts had already labeled it a non-viable investment. He overruled the report silently, then instructed his lawyers to erase all traces of Kane funding. Everything had to look like an anonymous hedge fund, stepping in with quiet, conditional support. He joined the company not as an executive, but as an assistant project coordinator. No one questioned it, no one looked too deeply. He worked overtime, took notes in silence, attended every dry meeting, fixed logistics bottlenecks without asking for credit. When an old storage wing flooded during a winter storm, John was the first one mopping water at midnight while others were asleep. In just 6 months, he tripled project turnaround and salvaged 2 near-failed contracts. By the time Mr. Rivera promoted him to project manager, the company had regained enough footing to hold a tentative position in the market again. Sophia took notice, everyone did. But John never acted superior, he was always calm, composed, never stepping beyond the line. Except once. Sophia's mother had suffered from recurring migraines. During one dinner meeting, she had turned pale mid-conversation, clutching her head. While everyone else froze or looked away politely, John disappeared for exactly 12 minutes and returned with her exact prescription from the 24-hour pharmacy 2 blocks down. No one even knew how he got it so fast. "Thank you, John," Sophia had whispered that night, her voice trembling as she brushed her hair behind her ear. He'd just smiled. "You remembered my name." She had laughed, and that's where it began. A year passed, their relationship bloomed slowly, private coffees in the break room, inside jokes during meetings, long walks to her car, a simple handhold during a company retreat turned into weekly dinners. He never pushed for more. She said she wanted to take things slow. He respected that. Once, when her apartment's plumbing burst and no plumber was available, John showed up at her door with tools and a quiet smile. He didn't just fix the leak, he replaced the pipe entirely and stayed until midnight to make sure it didn't happen again. Another time, she mentioned offhand that she missed the curry her mother used to make before her hands began trembling too much to cook. The next week, he left a lunchbox on her desk, with the exact recipe, still warm. She never asked how he got it, he never said. He wasn't just in love, he was building a life with her, piece by careful piece. Ryan joined about a year into their relationship, a junior logistics officer, recommended by an external agency, and placed under John for training. Polite, observant, eager to learn. He kept his head down, always seemed helpful. Not particularly close to Sophia, but then again, John never suspected anything. Ryan never once stepped out of line. He always knocked before entering the office. Always addressed Sophia as Miss Rivera. John trusted him. Even lent him his spare laptop once, shared lunch with him during late shifts, defended him when other team leads complained he didn't speak much. Ryan would nod silently, smile awkwardly, and return to his work. Then there was Deborah. Quiet, smart, the kind of woman who noticed more than she said. She'd joined a few months after John. As one of the finance analysts, she worked 2 floors below, but somehow, she always seemed to be nearby when things mattered. She never said a word about John and Sophia, never inserted herself, but whenever John needed a last-minute budget report or a fix for a pending invoice, Deborah was the one who got it done with no fuss. Sometimes, during team briefings, Deborah would glance at Ryan, not with suspicion, but with caution, as if something about him didn't add up. John noticed it once, but brushed it off. Deborah had a quiet intensity, maybe she was just overthinking. But now, John stood in the ruins of all that careful trust. The man he had trained, trusted, even promoted, was the one Sophia now kissed by the ocean in a tweet. And Deborah? He remembered seeing her pause outside his office the day before. She had looked at him for a moment longer than usual, almost like she wanted to say something. He wished now that she had. He wished he had asked. Because love wasn't just fragile, it was blinding. And he had walked into it with both eyes closed. It was a routine check. John had borrowed a logistics tablet from one of the interns that morning, an internal device still logged into the company's shared social media accounts for market tracking. He didn't think much of it until a notification popped up. A tweet. Sophia's handle. At first, he almost swiped it away, then froze. From now on, I'll only lie beside the man who truly deserves me. A photo was attached, her lips on Ryan's, their silhouettes locked together beneath the golden glow of sunset on a beach, the same beach she'd told John she was too busy to visit that weekend. The comments were worse, the replies from her friends, the teasing emojis, the gushing approval, and one particular reply caught John like a punch to the chest. "What happened to your pure love war god?" Her response came fast. "Compared to young Master Kane, John isn't even qualified to stand in front of me." John stood still for a long time, his breath caught between ribs that suddenly felt too narrow to hold the weight of his silence. The device slipped slightly in his hand. She'd blocked him from her public account. She knew he'd never see it. Unless fate intervened. It had. He walked back to his office without speaking to anyone. Closed the door. Logged into the Kane Conglomerate secure line. Within 30 minutes, he had pulled the plug on everything, the hidden funding channels to Rivera Enterprises, the confidential support clauses tied to Sophia's father's assets, the credit extensions masked under false subsidiaries. Within the hour, Rivera Enterprises was bleeding. No warning, no explanation, no calls returned. By the time Sophia stormed into his office, her heels clacking against the marble like gunfire, the ink on the withdrawal orders was already dry. "You bastard!" she hissed, slamming a thick folder of documents onto his desk. Her cheeks were flushed, not with embarrassment, but pure rage. "What the hell is this, John? The Kane contracts were our last line. What did you do?" He didn't look up. She grabbed his wrist. "I'm talking to you." Only then did he raise his eyes, slow and steady, placing the company tablet silently between them. Open, still showing her tweet. Her pupils shrank instantly. He watched her carefully, waiting for shame, regret, panic. None came. Instead, she scoffed and crossed her arms. "So you went through my phone? That's what you're mad about?" His voice was low, controlled. "It wasn't your phone." She rolled her eyes. "Whatever. I guess the truth's out now." Sophia leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the desk. "Let me break it to you clean, John. My family got through the worst of our financial crisis thanks to Young Master Kane, not you. You're just some workaholic with half-decent brains and a bleeding heart. Ryan saw our worth. He saw me. You..." She gave a hollow laugh. "You were just a warm-up." Outside the office, Deborah froze mid-step. The entire floor had fallen silent. Sophia either didn't notice or didn't care. Her voice didn't lower, it grew sharper, more cutting. "You thought I loved you?" She laughed again, more bitter this time. "You've been playing pretend for 3 years and I was bored. You were safe, predictable, and I was tired of waiting for something better." John stayed quiet. Sophia stepped back, her expression curling into something cruel and victorious. "Ryan offered what you couldn't. Real power, real backing. My father finally got access to someone with vision. We don't need you anymore." Then she noticed the velvet box on the edge of the desk. She picked it up slowly, opened it, and blinked. The diamond ring inside shimmered like fire. Her expression faltered for a fraction of a second, just a second. Then she smiled. Mocking. "Is this supposed to impress me? A toy ring for your fantasy bride?" She hurled it across the room. It struck the wall, bounced off, and landed near the open hallway, where at least 5 employees now stood frozen, watching everything unfold. "You never deserved me, John. You were just a background character in my story." Behind her, Mrs. Rivera's voice suddenly cut in, soft, almost too quiet. "Sophia, your color." Sophia turned pale, her hand reflexively gripped her stomach, and her knees buckled slightly. Mrs. Rivera rushed to her side, gently rubbing her back. "It's been 3 months. Why are you still getting sick like this?" John felt something shatter inside him. 3 months. He stared at Sophia as she recovered, as her body readjusted, and her breath evened. She looked up at him once, and in that moment, there was no guilt in her eyes. Only triumph. Outside the office, whispers had started. Ryan wasn't there. But Deborah was. Her hands were clenched at her sides, lips pressed tight, eyes burning with a mixture of fury and heartbreak, for a man who had given everything, only to be stepped on like garbage. John didn't flinch, not when Sophia flipped her hair, not when she grabbed her purse like nothing had happened. "You should pack your things," she said on her way out. "Daddy won't keep you around after today." John watched her walk away. Then I looked down at the shattered ring on the floor. It glinted once before the shadow of the door swept over it. John didn't remember walking out of the office. The minutes after Sophia's departure bled into a grey haze. People murmured around him, but their voices sounded like echoes underwater. His shoes moved, one foot in front of the other, yet he couldn't feel the ground beneath him. He reached the elevator, the doors closed, and that's when it hit him. 3 months. Sophia was pregnant, but not with his child. They had been together for 3 years. He had respected her wishes, her boundaries. She'd often said she believed in saving that part of herself until after marriage. Her voice had trembled sweetly, and John, thinking her sincerity was sacred, had never once pressed. He had admired her for it, but it had all been a performance. He leaned against the elevator wall, knuckles white, chest tight. It wasn't just betrayal, it was violation. She hadn't just replaced him, she had humiliated him, privately, publicly, viscerally, and the worst part, she never intended to tell him. Everything about her declarations of purity, her wide-eyed looks when they kissed, the way she said, "You make me feel safe," it was all a lie. She had already given Ryan what she told John she wasn't ready to give. And now, she carried Ryan's child while throwing John to the wolves. His hands trembled. He gritted his teeth and slammed the emergency stop button. The elevator jolted to a halt, silent. His breath came in short bursts. Images swarmed his mind, Sophia laughing as he fixed her leaky sink, Sophia lying in his arms, whispering, "I've never felt this close to someone before." Sophia kissing Ryan under a sunset, pressing her hand over her stomach with a proud smile. He pressed his forehead to the cold metal wall and let the pain rush through him like a fire hose snapping from pressure. He didn't cry. He couldn't. The betrayal had carved too deep to allow something as fragile as tears. Later that day, Deborah found him on the rooftop smoking a cigarette he never lit. She stood beside him in silence for several minutes. "You don't have to talk," she finally said. He didn't look at her. "Good. I saw everything," she added softly. Still, no response. "I never liked her," Deborah whispered. He turned slowly, eyes still dull. "Then you saw what that says about me." "No," she said, and her voice shook. "I saw a man who gave everything, who believed someone would see him for who he was. You didn't fail, John, she did." He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Her eyes were glassy, and the pain she carried wasn't for herself, it was for him. But he couldn't receive it. Not yet. "Thank you," he said quietly, then walked away. That weekend, Rivera Enterprises hosted a gala at the Grand Crest Ballroom, a formal celebration of the company's ongoing partnerships with select firms. John debated not going. Then he remembered, he wasn't there to celebrate. He was there to watch it all fall apart. He entered wearing a basic charcoal gray suit, no tie, hair neatly combed, calm, cold, empty. Halfway through the night, the crowd shifted as Sophia and Ryan entered hand in hand. She wore a silver backless gown, he wore a fitted tuxedo. They smiled as if they were royalty, as if the world revolved around them. John stepped to the side, sipping plain water. Ryan noticed him first. He smirked and leaned in to whisper something into Sophia's ear. She giggled loudly, deliberately, and the two strolled over. "Look who decided to show up," Ryan said, voice loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "I thought they'd revoked your pass after your little tantrum." John said nothing. Sophia sipped her champagne. He probably came to see what success looks like. John's eyes flicked between them. Flaunting other people's names isn't success, it's identity theft. The air chilled. Ryan laughed. "You still bitter about the contract? You think your whining will bring the Kane deals back?" John tilted his head. "Impersonation is a crime, Ryan. Hope you have your ID ready." Ryan blinked. Sophia stiffened. Before anyone could speak, Sophia's hand shot across and slapped John square across the face. The sound cracked across the ballroom. Gasps followed. John's face stayed perfectly still, the red imprint blooming slowly against his cheek. He didn't react. He turned to her, voice like frost. "You just proved everything I ever needed to know about you." Sophia looked stunned for a moment, like her emotions had gotten ahead of her logic, but John was already walking away. The seeds were planted, the noose was tightening, and neither of them even knew it yet. The chandelier lights glittered across champagne glasses as Sophia floated through the ballroom, the picture of elegance. Her engagement dress was a blush gold that shimmered with every turn of her body, carefully chosen to reflect the luxury she believed she now belonged to. Ryan stood at her side, hand on her lower back, dressed in a crisp white tuxedo, smirking like the king of the room. The Rivera family beamed as they welcomed guests from the upper echelons of society, people they once only read about in magazines. It had taken decades for the Riveras to even get a dinner meeting with the Kane Group. Now, it looked as though their daughter had married into it. Except she hadn't. At precisely 8:45 p.m., the entrance doors parted. John stepped in, flanked by his longtime assistant, Marcus, dressed in a tailored black suit with a minimalist lapel pin, the Kane Conglomerate insignia in gold. Heads turned immediately. Whispers rippled like an earthquake's first tremor. "Is that? Wait, Isn't he the guy Sophia used to date? Why is he here? Who invited him? From across the ballroom, Ryan's posture stiffened, his smirk vanished like a glitch in his expression. Sophia followed his gaze, and her wine glass trembled mid-air. The lights hit John's face as he walked calmly to the center of the room, eyes never leaving the stage. He stopped in front of Sophia and Ryan, expression unreadable. "Sorry I'm late," he said, voice steady and precise. "I was waiting for the perfect moment." Sophia opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. John turned to the crowd, his voice echoing now through the elegant space. "Good evening. I'm John Kane, also known in the business registry as Young Master Kane of the Kane Conglomerate." The room fell into absolute silence. Ryan took half a step back. John reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather folder. Inside this file are payroll receipts, internal communications, and HR onboarding documents, proving that Ryan Santiago was hired by me personally as an assistant 3 years ago. Everything he knows about Kane Group was taught to him by me. Every name he dropped, every piece of access he flashed, given to him under trust. A pause. Which he violated. Deborah, standing quietly at the back in a navy dress, held up her phone and began recording. Ryan's face drained of color. "You're bluffing." John's eyes locked onto his. "Would you like me to pull up your work chat log? You still have my old laptop, don't you?" Sophia staggered slightly, looking at Ryan like she was seeing him for the first time. "Wait, what's he talking about?" Ryan didn't answer. Marcus stepped forward and handed a printed copy of Ryan's salary receipts and company email chain to a few journalists already reaching for their press badges. John turned to Sophia, his voice softened, almost tender. "Congratulations on your engagement, to my assistant." The gasp that left Sophia's mouth was soundless. Her hand clutched the edge of the dessert table as if to hold herself upright. No, that's not. Ryan said he said he was me," John finished. "And you believed him, because he drove the car I let him borrow, because you were too eager to climb, you never thought to look down." Sophia's father pushed through the crowd, looking around in horror. "What's happening? Why are people leaving?" John's assistant was already collecting the gift he had brought, a blank envelope with the Kane seal on it. Inside was a note: "Your contract with us was cancelled months ago. This engagement doesn't renew it." Cameras flashed. News reporters whispered rapidly into their phones. Guests from the city's biggest firms and financial institutions quietly excused themselves, one after another. In less than 15 minutes, more than half the ballroom had emptied. Sophia's father rushed after them. Sophia stood in shock, staring at the ring on her finger like it had turned to stone. Ryan tried to speak, but John had already turned his back. As he walked toward the exit, Deborah followed at a careful distance. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. But John stopped once at the threshold and turned his head slightly toward Sophia. "There was a time I would have done anything for you," he said calmly, "but now, I just thank you for showing me who you really are." Then he left. And the Rivera legacy crumbled behind him. 3 days after the engagement scandal, headlines flared again, but this time, with John's name in bold red across every screen. Kane heir arrested in connection to collapsed suburban construction project, 1 worker dead, another missing. Was the Kane Conglomerate cutting corners to protect the golden boy? John stood silently in the back of a police transport van, wrists cuffed, flanked by officers who didn't dare meet his gaze for long. He wore the same suit he'd worn to the engagement party. Not because he wanted to, but because there hadn't been time to change before the arrest. They hadn't even allowed him to finish his coffee. The Western Suburbs project had always been a risk, one he had personally overseen during its foundational phase. After he stepped back, the execution was passed on through Rivera Enterprises. Documents had changed hands, materials had shifted, corners had been cut, and now, someone was dead. A steel beam had collapsed during inspection, and it didn't take long for planted documents to surface. Signatures, directives, orders, all of them pointed back to him. Ryan's final blow. Inside the interrogation room, John said nothing. He didn't have to. Because hours later, as night fell over the precinct, the door opened quietly. Marcus stepped in, holding a folder. Beside him was an attorney so powerful her name alone cleared courtrooms. John walked out without a word. The cuffs were gone, his record, already in the process of being wiped. Outside the station, Deborah stood waiting by a black car, arms crossed, eyes flashing. "They're desperate," she said softly as he approached. "They're panicking." John stepped into the car and closed the door. The next day, chaos consumed the Rivera family. News had spread like wildfire, investors pulling out, partners distancing themselves, and contracts evaporating like smoke. Sophia's father spent the morning pacing through his office, throwing his phone across the room every time another call came with bad news. Sophia stared blankly at her reflection in the mirror, one hand resting over her belly. Ryan was nowhere to be found. By evening, Sophia was at John's private residence, standing in the rain, soaked through but refusing to leave. She looked thinner, more tired, still beautiful, but ruined. John opened the door and stood there, watching her without expression. "You have to help us," she pleaded, stepping forward. "The media, the company, they're coming after my father. He'll be arrested. They say the project was built on his orders, but it wasn't. It was Ryan." John didn't blink. "Then give me the documents," he said. "The originals, the ones with Ryan's signature. That's the only thing that'll clear your father's name." Sophia hesitated. It's not that simple." John's silence was louder than any scream. Sophia looked down. "He promised to protect us. He said he'd marry me before anything like this ever went public." A slap cracked through the hallway. Mrs. Rivera had followed her daughter inside and now stood trembling near the entrance, her eyes wet with rage. "You absolute fool," she snapped. "You're nothing to him. He used your womb like a PR shield and disappeared. Open your eyes, Sophia." Sophia flinched, eyes wide and watery. Her mother turned to John with urgency. "If you still care about justice, you'll take the documents. I made copies." John watched Sophia for a moment longer, watched her silently hand him a sealed envelope. She didn't say thank you. He didn't either. By the time he reached his office, Marcus was already waiting with a grave face and a medical report in his hand. "You need to see this." Inside was a series of records, genetic scans, and a DNA match. Ryan Santiago wasn't just a fraud. He was John's half-brother. Son of the very woman who had wrecked John's home. The mistress who had paraded around Kane's estate like a queen while John's mother withered in silence, her dignity stripped away by whispers, her sadness mistaken for weakness, until one day, she disappeared for good. John sat back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin, staring at the report without blinking. So that's why Ryan had moved like he owned everything. Why their father had been silent since the fallout, why every door had cracked open just wide enough for Ryan to slip through and pretend to belong. He wasn't a stranger. He was the mistake the family tried to bury. The truth burned through John's chest like fire in his lungs. That night, John returned to the Kane estate for the first time in years. The ancestral mansion loomed like a carcass in the dark, still polished, still perfect, but rotting inside with secrets. The butler opened the door wordlessly, and John found his father exactly where he expected, sitting in the study, swirling whiskey under dim light. The old man didn't look surprised. "You're here," he said. "I suppose you want to talk about Ryan." "No," John replied. "I'm here to talk about my mother." The room went silent. "I know what you did," John said quietly. "You brought that woman into our home. You paraded her in front of your wife. You let your son, your real son, watch her suffer every day until the light left her eyes." His father's expression twisted. "That's enough." "No," John said, voice rising. "What's enough is the way you still tried to protect that boy. You let him steal my name, my legacy, and now you're standing in the ashes pretending you're not to blame. He's your brother." "No, he's your shame." The silence that followed was thick and bitter. "You'll never be rid of him," his father said darkly. "That blood runs through your company, through this house." "Then I'll burn the house," John replied coldly. The next week, shareholders received a surprising announcement, an emergency vote to shift controlling interest. The vote passed. John Kane became sole majority shareholder of the Kane Conglomerate. He liquidated every asset tied to his father's old mistress, froze every account linked to Ryan, cut off every partner who had ever dealt with them behind closed doors. The house his mother had died in, sold. The chair his father used every night, burned. Everything his mother had been denied, John reclaimed in silence. and what he couldn't recover from. He was destroyed. Ryan's fall began not with a police raid, but with a push of code. The Kane Group's internal audit division leaked a full report to the press, backed with signatures, timestamps, and surveillance captures. Ryan Santiago, the supposed Young Master Kane, had siphoned millions through dummy accounts, forged site inspections, and greenlit the use of substandard materials in at least 5 suburban construction zones. The headline spread like wildfire. Kane heir imposter behind deadly site collapse. Real heir. John Kane cleared. Brotherhood claims false. John said nothing publicly. The world said it for him. Sophia's engagement was annulled before breakfast. Investors sued the Rivera family before lunch. By sunset, the only thing Sophia had left was a dimming spotlight and a legacy of shame. Ryan vanished. For 6 days, the city pulsed with search updates. Anonymous sources claimed he was headed for Singapore. One report tracked him to a luxury rental in the hills. None were true. He had returned to the scene of his original lie. The unfinished high-rise in the western suburbs, his vanity project, his proof of status, his throne of cut corners and hollow glory. It was midnight when they found him. John arrived moments later, escorted by plainclothes officers. He stepped quietly into the elevator shaft scaffolding, his shoes crunching over broken glass and dried cement as he ascended to the top floor. There, in the wind-whipped darkness, stood Ryan. Drenched in sweat, pupils wild, duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He was trying to pry open a rusted access door to the roof. He hadn't shaved in days. His designer coat was torn. He looked like a trapped animal, one that knew the end had come and couldn't understand why. John stood a few meters behind him, holding a single envelope in one hand. Ryan spun, startled. He laughed, breathless and cracked. "You followed me?" "John." His voice was low. "Did you think this would end any other way?" Ryan stepped backward. "It wasn't supposed to go like this. I was promised. He told me I'd be part of the legacy, that I'd be accepted. You had everything. You didn't need it." "I had a mother who cried herself to sleep while yours laughed in her face," John replied. "That's what I had." He held up the envelope. Ryan squinted. "What's that?" "Proof," John said. "You're not even his son." Ryan blinked. John opened the envelope and let the DNA report fall, page by page, onto the dusty concrete. The name Ryan Santiago stamped beside no genetic match in red ink. The color drained from Ryan's face. "No, that's not possible. She told me, my mother said. She lied, just like you." A gust of wind screamed through the building. A soft creak echoed beneath them, and then, crack. The floor beneath Ryan gave way in an instant. Years of rot, ignored safety protocols, and thin steel beams finally surrendered. Ryan didn't even scream. He plummeted like a puppet with its strings cut, crashing down through 2 floors before vanishing in silence. John stood at the edge, watching as dust rose from the darkness below. He didn't move, didn't speak, only exhaled. Later that week, Sophia posted a live stream from a small, dimly lit room, no makeup, no jewelry, just messy hair, tired eyes, and desperation. "Ryan wasn't perfect," she whispered. "But he tried. John Kane is just using his money to control the narrative. None of you know what really happened. The media ruined everything. I lost the baby. Are you happy now?" She sobbed on camera for nearly 20 minutes. John never responded. When tabloids released blurry photos of Sophia passed out drunk in a hotel hallway the following week, John never commented. When an audio leak revealed she'd begged a news outlet for money in exchange for exclusive footage of their private moments, John stayed silent. The world forgot her. But Deborah didn't forget John. She arrived at his penthouse one quiet evening, dressed simply, holding a bag of food she'd cooked herself. He didn't speak when he opened the door, he just stepped aside. They sat together in silence on the balcony, watching the city lights blink like distant memories. She poured him tea. He didn't thank her, he didn't need to. She wasn't there for gratitude. She was there because she had always seen him, not the surname, not the empire, not the pain, but the man. And that was enough. Hours passed. She eventually stood and whispered, "Good night." He nodded once. When she left, he remained on the balcony. The wind had picked up, the sky had begun to clear. In his hand was a brittle, red maple leaf. Sophia had slipped it into one of his notebooks years ago in college, a quiet, hopeful gesture from a girl he thought had loved him. He looked at it now with no anger, no longing, only finality. He struck a match and let the edges catch fire. The leaf curled, darkened, and turned to ash in his palm. He held it until it crumbled fully, then released it into the wind. The ashes scattered into the night. His voice, barely above a whisper, carried with them. Now, I'm free.